All right. We are picking it up on chapter 11, page 45. This is for Friday's recorded read along. Um, we learned about the 7 most important things the other day, oddly, and they were this. I'm going to learn more about this right now. Arthur stood there a long time. This is page 45. Arthur stood there a long time trying to decide what to do. Snowflakes melted on his head and his nose ran. Officer Billy said no excuses. But nobody could expect him to do a crazy job like this, could they? The list didn't even make sense. Collect cardboard. One of the 7 most important things. In what? The world? The universe? Along with coffee cans? And foil? No way. He wasn't doing it. So he left the cart right where it was and headed down the alley, kicking the gravel hard in front of him as he walked. What a joke, he thought. But he had only gone a short distance before his pace began to slow. He thought about leaving to tell his mother he had screwed up again, that he'd given up on probation sentence before he'd even started it, that he'd quit and come home. He was sure she'd probably start crying, and that would make Barbara cry too. There would be Officer Billy to deal with, and who knows what Officer Billy would do if he was her first kid to screw up. And he'd probably have to face the judge again too. And Juvie's bad food, and Juvie's bad showers, and Juvie's bad kids. The more he thought about it, the more Arthur knew he couldn't stand to deal with that mess again. Reluctantly, he turned back toward the garage. The cart and list were waiting for him. Of course. As Arthur wrapped his fingers around the grimy metal handle of the cart, he tried to tell himself that pushing a rusty grocery cart around a neighborhood wasn't the worst thing that had happened to him, or in the last few months, or the worst thing that could happen to him again in his life. He had already thought of that. He tried to convince himself that maybe this was just a test. Maybe Judge Warner and Officer Billy wanted to find out how he'd react. They'd probably figure out he'd see the stupid list, give up, and go home. Just what we'd expect from a no-good kid like Arthur Owens, they'd say. Arthur started pushing the cart down the gravel alleyway, determined to prove them wrong. Determined to show he could collect a bunch of junk for an old man. 10 minutes later, he couldn't stand the test any longer. The rattling din of the cart was worse than the sound of fingernails on a chalkboard. The jangling noises of the cart rang in his ears. It set his teeth on edge. It made his head hurt. Plus, after he'd only gone a block, the wheel stuck. Wouldn't budge at all. Arthur had to lift the cart halfway off the sidewalk and shove it forward. But instead of going straight, the empty cart veered wildly to the right and tipped over in somebody's snowy yard. The wheels spun in the air. He yanked it upright, hauled it back to the sidewalk. The same wheel stuck again. He kicked it hard, which actually worked. For a minute, Arthur was kind of proud of himself. Maybe he had some of his dad's mechanical talent after all. He started moving down the street. His dad, I'm making note of this. Page 47. He's still talking about his dad and being proud of his dad. And he was actually proud to have maybe some of his dad's mechanical talent. So he has not stopped thinking about his dad. How is Arthur going to find a redemption? Is it through his dad? Through the junk man? I mean, right now he doesn't seem like very much being saved at all, really, quite frankly. But the wheel stuck again. Speaking of which, Arthur swore under his breath. He was sure the people who lived in the houses nearby were laughing their heads off as they watched him wrestle the junk man's busted cart a few hundred feet down the block. He noticed one guy standing on his front porch smoking a cigarette. From the smirk on his face, Arthur could tell he was probably the guy's main entertainment this morning. Finally, Arthur half pushed and half dragged the cart down to Groovy Jim's, and he shoved it in the alley next to the shop. Nobody said he had to use the useless thing, okay? All he needed was some kind of bag to collect the stuff on his list. He'd ask Groovy Jim. He pushed open the door of the tattoo shop again, got a blast of the antiseptic smells and Hawaiian music. Tried not to look as angry, as frustrated as he felt. "Hey, kiddo," said Groovy Jim, from up where he was sitting behind the counter, feet up, reading a book. "Back again? You find your guy?" He shook his head and he mumbled, "No, he wasn't there. You must have just missed him." "Yeah, I guess." Arthur glanced around. You got any spare bags? I'm collecting some for a school project." "Sure. I got a couple of burlap ones from the grocer across the street. How many you need?" "Just one." "And what about some cans or glass jars?" He added, thinking of the 7 most important things. "You have anything like that?" "I'll see what I can find," said Groovy Jim, and he nodded. After Groovy Jim disappeared in the back room, Arthur couldn't help feeling a little guilty for lying to a guy who had been so nice and helpful so far. But how could he tell him that he was collecting garbage because he'd thrown a brick at a person's head? And even worse, that it was the person Groovy Jim knew. Arthur had never been a good liar, not even about silly things like pretending to believe in Santa Claus or Barbara or Christmas, and not when it came to serious things like covering his head for his dad's drinking sometimes. So, it's very interesting. Arthur is not a very good liar. He's not really a bad kid. He has a big heart. I mean, that's what that evidence tells me. You know, in terms of interpreting characters through their actions, Arthur's a bad liar. That means he has a good heart. He can't stand lack of truth. And again, the line was, and he especially couldn't lie when it came for covering up for his dad's drinking. So when he saw his dad not doing well, you know, it still didn't throw him. Then it says, look, it says Christmas. Christmas. The sudden thought of what they would do for Christmas without his dad hit Arthur like a fist in the stomach. This was the kind of stuff he still couldn't deal with. He had been in juvie for Thanksgiving, so he hadn't had to face his first holiday without his dad. But how would they get through Christmas? And not just this Christmas either. His dad would be gone every Christmas, every birthday, every holiday from now on, forever. Thinking about it all, Arthur couldn't breathe. Fortunately, the clattering crash of a half-dozen ginger ale cans hitting the floor and rolling in all directions snapped him back to reality. "Geez, old Pete!" Groovy Jim glanced helplessly at the cans he dropped on the floor, and he came back in the room. "Man, sorry about that." After they had picked up the cans and Groovy Jim added an empty Skippy jar he had been using as a pencil holder, Arthur forced himself to focus on the 7 most important things. To not think about his dad or the future. All he had to do was find a few more things to keep the junk man happy, and he'd be done for Saturday. 116 more hours to go. "Good luck with your school project," said Groovy Jim. "You should ask Hampton for some stuff if you see him. He's always collecting things." "Yeah, I will." Yet another lie. Chapter 12, page 51. Outside, the air felt colder this time around, and the December afternoon had gotten much gloomier. The snow looked like white BB pellets that came down from the sky. Arthur swung the bag of soda pop cans over his shoulder, wincing at the noise, glancing up and down the street, looking for anything that might fit the junk man's list. A lot of people had their garbage cans out, so Saturday had to be the collection day in the neighborhood. Fortunately, the garbage trucks hadn't finished their pickup yet, so there was a lot out. In front of a small grocery store across the street, Arthur noticed a stack of flattened cardboard boxes, wrapped in twine. Perfect. He crossed the street to pick an armload of them and brought them back to the cart, since it was easier than hauling around a bunch of soggy cardboard around with him all afternoon. Most important number thing, 7, cardboard, done. Farther down the street, Arthur found a lamp in someone else's trash pile. You could see why they'd thrown it out. It looked like an ugly turquoise teardrop. Plus, it had a big chip out of one side. It was missing its bulb and shade. Still, Arthur figured finding an entire lamp was probably way better than finding a light bulb. He carried the lamp back to the cart. Most important thing, number 1, light bulbs. Done. But the toaster was his best discovery. Toaster. He had just reached the end of the block when he spotted the silver toaster sitting in a row of trash cans, as if it was waiting for breakfast. There was an old lady walking by with a bag of groceries at the same time, so Arthur decided to ask her if she thought the toaster was being thrown out, just to be sure before he took it. More evidence that Arthur is a good person. This toaster is sitting in the garbage, and he still doesn't want to be accused of taking something inappropriately. Do you think I could take that thing? He pointed nervously at the toaster. The lady gave him a sympathetic look and squinted at the house behind him. I don't know the people who live there, but if it's in the garbage, I'm sure you can have it if you need it, young man. Feeling his face start to go red, Arthur picked up the toaster and hurried back to the cart. He didn't turn around again until he was sure the lady was gone. So this is so interesting. How's he going to find his redemption? I mean, he is embarrassed to pick up things from the trash. And this is his job. 116 more hours of this to go. Later, he found a dented hubcap by the curb. Another shiny thing. And for the most important thing, number 4, pieces of wood, he pulled a couple of evergreen branches from a messy pile of shrubbery trimmings beside somebody's driveway. By 3 o'clock, he was finished. As he hauled the grocery cart out of its spot next to Groovy Jim's spot and dumped the contents of the burlap bag inside, he thought the first Saturday of his probation had gone pretty well. It was true he hadn't found all the things on the junk man's list. He'd given up on mirrors. For instance, really? How often do people throw out a mirror? And he switched around a few other things on the list. He left ginger ale cans instead of coffee cans, a lamp instead of light bulbs, and he found a really nice toaster and the hubcap instead of foil. But he figured the junk man wouldn't mind, right? He got close enough, right? However, Arthur Owens would soon find out the junk man did mind. And close enough was not nearly good enough. So I will leave that today. That's only 12 minutes today. But it's the weekend, so I'm going to leave it short. There'll be more pre-recorded video on Monday. I don't expect you to write about these pages today because I just want you to finish your paragraph on what kind of a person Arthur is. And on Monday, I will have some writing prompts, and I'll talk about the writing prompts as I do the recorded video. Thank you for letting me help me out with my family and being such great kids. Remember, on tomorrow, we're meeting at 10 o'clock, the whole class on Zoom, and that's a schedule change. So be there, and I'll see you guys.